Hello, it's me Dryzz. We've done a bunch of frames already, like Revenant, Dagath, Vauban, etc. But now we are covering Grendel. First, we'll see what he does. Just like for the Sevagoth video, I'll have a friend who's a Grendel main cover his abilities. This time, we got PVZ.
Passive. Each enemy in your gut gives 250 flat armor, with a maximum of 5 enemies giving 1250 armor. This armor is applied after armor mods.
First ability, Feast. On press, you engage in an animation lasting 1.5 seconds at base that will swallow nearby enemies that can be affected by CC, so not having an overguard. These enemies will go into your gut. Each enemy that you grab, up to 5, will increase the cast duration by 1 second. On holding your wand, you'll vomit out the stored enemies in your gut, dealing toxin damage with a 100% status chance in an AoE in front of you. The damage scales with enemy level and is multiplied with the amount of enemies in your gut. And all enemies in your gut will take a % damage per second until they die. Feast will pull together pickups similar to Mag's Greedy Pull Augment, and will pull hand-thrown grenades by enemies, switching their side and making them damage enemies. Enemy auras like Ancient Healers, Guardian Xmas, and Nullifiers are disabled while in your gut. Feast will not work on enemies grabbed by certain Warframe abilities like Zaku's 3 and Garuda's Blood Altar. If you use Feast on an enemy affected by Nidus' Parasitic Link, it will completely erase the enemy. It won't go in your gut. It does not work on bosses, and it used to work on Junction Specters, but they sadly recently patched that. If you enter a Nullifier bubble or blackout from falling out of the map, all enemies in your gut will be deleted. Enemies in your belly are counted as dead for missions where killing the enemies matter, like Defense and Exterminate. Except for the Jackal in Circuit, because Jackal's stupid and Circuit's stupid. There is some bugs with Nullifiers in your gut, specifically on Client, where your camera will start to break, and I don't have video of this, but the Octocore and some other Demon weapons can get stuck on enemies in your gut. It has an augment, Gourmand. Feast will consume health instead of energy, giving 150 more armor per enemy in your stomach, up to a max of 2000. This does remove the ability to shield gate with your wand. Second ability, Nourish. With an enemy in your gut, if you activate Nourish, it will deal a % of damage to that enemy in your gut, usually the center one, and this damage is buffed by Roar and some other damage buff. This will regen a large amount of health, usually over 1000, and gives you and allies in range the Nourish buff. The Nourish buff makes it so it has many things it does. When you take damage, you will create an AoE applying 10 viral stacks around you with a 2-second cooldown. It gives a buff to your weapons and some abilities, similar to a viral mod, giving more damage and the viral status to your abilities and weapons. It gives a multiplier to all forms of energy gained. It is Grendel Subsumed, however it is nerfed somewhat significantly. It no longer heals. The AoE viral effect only gives 1 stack instead of 10. And the viral mod effect has reduced viral damage, and it has a reduced energy multiplier. However, it no longer requires enemies to cast because you can't eat people on other frames. Augment, Hardy Nourishment. Nourish status cleanses and gives status and knockdown immunity with its duration scaling based on the enemies in your gut. Third ability, Pulverize. Grendel turns into a ball, healing himself over time, and he rolls around, knocking down enemies nearby. When Grendel jumps or is in the air and hits the ground, he slams down, making a shockwave that armor strips and knocks down enemies in an AoE. The armor strip has no line of sight. The more enemies in your gut, up to the maximum of 5, will increase the range and size of the ball and its armor strip, up to a maximum of 20 meters with 5 enemies. This does scale with range mods. At 200% strength, you will full strip on jumping. While in the ball, he has a base speed of 12 meters per second. Sprinting will increase this to 30 meters per second. He can jump, double jump, and wall jump, but can't do things like bullet jumping and aim gliding while in the ball. He cannot use weapons and cannot use subzooms while in the ball. However, if you activate a subzoom beforehand, it will quite carry over for some silly things like Aqua Blades, making it's kind of like a Beyblade. The movement speed is increased by sprint speed and other things that affect jump height or movement speed buffs. It is not affected by parkour velocity or bullet jump speed. So Volt speed buff and Wisp's haste modes will work, but things like parkour shards will not. The ceramic dagger speed buff also will work. Pulverize itself has no energy cost, but it will drain some energy per second, unless there is at least one enemy in your gut, where then the drain is dropped down back to 0. If you run out of energy, Grendel will be CC'd for about a second, and you just can't do anything for that second. While in Pulverize, you can replenish energy from some flat sources, but not things like energy pads, Zenarok's Wellspring, and other things. Unless there is enemies in his belly, then some of those work. There is a secret bug in the bugs tab on the wiki page.
Augment, Catapult. With the heavy attack button, Grendel will launch himself in the direction you're facing, increasing his speed significantly. Fourth ability, Regurgitate. Pukes at an enemy, throwing them at a projectile, ragdolling them when they hit the ground. When that enemy hits the surface, it will create an AoE, slowing them and applying toxin damage to enemies in the area. The toxin AoE does a flat amount of damage plus 10% of the target's current health. It will also armor strip when you have at least 134% ability strength. Like Nourish, it needs at least one enemy in your gut to actually have something to throw. So if you remove Feast, you cannot use Nourish or Regurgitate. Augment, Gastro. Enemies that you spit out will bounce 3 times, dealing gas damage as well, including the toxin emitter. Each bounce has a 75% damage fall off.
Thank you, PVZ. Recap. Passive. Get flat armor. Fist, work with passive for the flat armor, makes the 2 and 4 work, make the 3 cost no energy and have more range. Nourish, great viral priming, deals % damage to enemies in belly. CC, healing. Pulverize, mobility, armor stripping, healing. Regurgitate, nuke, armor stripping. Helminth, for the damage buffing, for once I won't recommend Nourish since it's already there. But Roar is great for the nuke, or to one-shot with Nourish's damage. Damage vulnerability are not to be forgotten too, so Sentient Wrath, Rest and Rage, Petrify, etc. You can also run Breed Surge to spread the 4th damage, or Testa Nervous with its augment, although it's clunky. You can also rely on the one with 5 enemies if you play in Endurance, for the hold part I mean. Grendel has a nerfed Nourish, but also multiple armor stripping sources, so it makes him a great weapon platform, meaning you can also run a Subsumed that helps even more with this, like Zata, Wrathful, Shock, Thermo Thunder, and Smite with the augment. In terms of survivability, he has a lot of armor, so you can consider health tanking, meaning running Eclipse or New Star can prove to be interesting, although I didn't really try it myself. Since his 1 and 4 can nuke, but they have a short range, running some grouping abilities can be very cool too, like Call Horizon, Pulled and Snare, etc. Since he's the viral king, I of course considered running Reef, which isn't too bad. Just need 300% strength, Rev Propaganda, yippee. Last one would be Infested Mobility with Pulverize and Catapult, to be even faster. Invigorations, I like strength and duration ones, but I guess my 5-1 would be range since the 4 has a tiny base range. Shards, this topic is a little more complex. Grendel's animations are super slow, so I'd recommend at least 2 toe casting speed. His 1 and 4 benefit a lot from Toxin Status Effect damage, but in general duration and strength ones are great. If you're playing with Wrathful, running the purple for CD on middies is sweet too, but for primaries the purple one for electricity damage on primaries are also great. If you run Koro and you play some puppy weapons in Endurance like Ocucore, then running Tograin for more core stacks will help. Builds, that's what I'd use for an all-around build. Now for beginner builds, I just show the one I'd recommend on everything basically. For Helminth builds, I'd go for very similar ones to be honest. In terms of ability buffing, we got this. Gastro is debatable, you choose if you want it, otherwise you can run some range. For the Reef build, you'll want at least 300% strength. If you wanna go fast, Infested Mobility, you'll want strength, movement speed and sprint speed. That's what I'd run for an Eclipse build. For weapon platforming, you'll basically want strength too. Now if you want the grouping build, you'll want a lot of range, then some strength. Subsumed Nourish. Although it's greatly nerfed, 1 stack AoE instead of 10, no regen and cast, it still remains one of the most useful subsumes. I know people started hating it, cause everyone has been using it, and you know, if something is popular you have to hate it, or something. But objectively speaking, Nourish is really nice, even as a subsume, as you might have guessed if you watch my other videos. You can use it to make any weapon better, even if it's not necessarily the best option, it always is among the best. Weaknesses. He may feel kinda clunky to play, and his nukes are very small. Pulverize doesn't allow for much, being able to actually the damage will be great. His cast time, especially the 1, are super slow. If you don't have at least 1 toe casting speed shard, you'll most likely die during the 1 animation quite often without 1. Another issue is he's got many bugs, making his gameplay sometimes annoying as hell. I guess I could mention Nourish and 4 needing enemies to work. Cosmetics. Opinion. He's a really fun frame, definitely worth playing, with a very useful kit. Kinda wished you could do more during his 3, but whatever. He can easily have a lot of armor, meaning you can health tank comfortably. Thank you for watching. Now you're a ball. Remember to have fun. Adios.